Hi, and welcome to the first episode of Thinking Differently, a podcast which is intended to help take interesting ideas or concepts, pull them apart, think about all of their different parts, and then hopefully put them back together again, maybe slightly transformed. Hopefully, by the end of this podcast, you'll understand a little bit more about what the podcast is for and what I intend it to be. And you'll be excited to come along the journey with me and explore some interesting topics. So let's get into why I'm doing this. I love the idea of playing with abstract ideas and concepts, and I really like challenging my way of thinking and questioning whether or not the way that I behave is true to my values or whether it's just a learned pattern, it's a well-worn path. I remember this happened really clearly when I was in an Italian class once and I finished the exercise while most of the other people were still on question one. And instantly, my brain went back to being an 11-year-old at school and thinking, oh, well, I don't want to make a scene. I don't want anybody to think I'm a swot or think I'm too clever or I'm showing off. So I won't tell the teacher. I will just stay quiet. And then I thought, oh, maybe I can just help somebody else next to me to get their work done instead of making a big deal about the fact that I'd already finished and I needed more work. And then I stopped and I thought, I am 32 years old and I am still behaving like an 11-year-old because I don't want to feel ostracized from a group because I have finished my work before everybody else. And that was so ridiculous to me as an idea that I started therapy pretty soon after that because I was like, if that tiny thing can spark all of these pre-learned behaviors, what else am I doing by default that actually I want to start challenging and I want to start thinking about a bit more? I find this also happens a lot when I'm around family. And family is a really interesting trigger for a lot of people because we naturally revert to the last state that we were in, the kind of person we were the last time we were around those people. So it's very common for someone who is very confident and outgoing most of the time to then slip back into their old patterns of who they were when they were a child when they're surrounded by their other family members. And again, this is really challenging for some people because they don't understand the mechanisms behind it. And so they think, well, why can't I just be as assertive as I am the rest of the time when I'm with this group of people, when I feel this way? And that's a lot of what I want to try and explore. I want to explore different ideas that I have about things and break them down into different parts and then ask questions like, is this actually what I believe, or is this something that somebody has told me to believe? And then if it is that somebody else has put that idea in my head, what do I want to believe instead? I think there's an interesting question about how we can truly know ourselves and know if we're living to our values and our belief systems. If we don't really know what's going on inside, if we don't know where those internal drivers and triggers are coming from, how can we truly know if we are able to be authentic and drive towards living the kind of life that we want to live? The other interesting thing is that you can't change what you can't see. So most of these patterns run in the background. They run in our subconscious. We're not even aware of them. And I think what that does is it obscures it from being able to see what's really going on. And so you can't change what you can't see. And not everything that you can't see needs changing, but it's worth occasionally bringing everything to the surface, having a look at it and seeing whether or not it still works. And then if it's fine, then just chuck it back in the background. The other thing is that non-action is still an action. So with a lot of these things, it comes down to risk profiles and how we perceive the risk. And that then means that potentially I can look at something and decide not to act on a thing rather than looking at it and deciding that actually I could make an incremental change to that thing which would make things better. Changing things is a lot more difficult than leaving them the same because we are more comfortable with the familiar, even if the familiar is no longer serving us. So now, who am I? I am not going to give the horrible 2-minute introduction that you normally have to give at work every time someone asks who you are, where you list all of your accomplishments and your title and your qualifications and all of those kind of things, because I don't feel like that describes who I am as a person. I think if I was going to describe myself in an abstract sense, I would call myself a problem solver. I was always the person in a classroom or in a meeting room who would ask the why question. In maths, why are we using that formula, or why are we doing things this way? I think I would consider my brain to work a little bit like a mechanic. If I want to understand something, if I want to truly remember and get a deep knowledge of a subject, I have to get into the weeds of it. I have to take the engine apart and see how each of the bits works, and only then can I put it back together and understand truly how it all works, how it all fits, and how each part works together as a whole. I also have a lot of interests and things that I get really excited about. I tend to hyper focus on a subject and then get really into the weeds of that thing. And that means that I listen to a lot of audio books. I tend to listen to them while I'm doing everything, which means I get through a lot of books in a year. And sometimes, due to neurodiversity, I also go off on a bit of a side quest and get distracted by something, but that something is also relevant in my brain to the entire puzzle as a whole. So what I hope this podcast will achieve for you, the listener, is just give you a jumping off point for thinking more deeply about a topic. Hopefully it will inspire some interesting conversations in your life where you can talk to other people about this. And maybe one day it will create a community of people who can break down problems, play with ideas, and then potentially find alternative solutions or learn different ways of existing that work better and help you live your true and authentic life. So each week I am going to try and focus on a subject to bring that subject up into our awareness and notice all of the things about that, investigate how all of those things fit together and how I think about them, which will hopefully trigger you to also think about how you think about those things and potentially inspire you to make improvements if improvements are needed. I would like to say from the off that all of these opinions that I'm going to share are just my own. I am not saying that anything I say is definitely the truth or 100% correct. And I also hope that over the course of doing this, I will have a deeper understanding of how I feel about things, and my opinions may change. I want to stick with a growth mindset. And so, really, this is not here to give you answers. It's just about playing with ideas and then possibly creating starter questions that turn into catalysts for you to ask deeper questions of yourselves and get excited about some interesting topics. So, as this is the first episode, I'm going to touch a little bit on why our brains do this shortcutting, why they do this kind of sitting in the background thing. And the idea is that it's because we only have a certain amount of processing power in our brain. And if we were thinking about everything all of the time, it would be completely overwhelming. So these things called heuristics, which are mental shortcuts, which on the whole are beneficial for us as human beings. So we're not constantly thinking about everything all of the time. I'm not constantly thinking as I'm walking up and down in this room how to walk. It's a learned behavior. It runs in the background on autopilot, which means that I can talk while I'm walking up and down in this room, and I'm not constantly thinking about how to move my feet forwards at the same time. The challenge with this is that sometimes those things don't work quite the way that we want them to. Sometimes things aren't as logical as we would expect them to appear. So there's this idea that I heard recently, I think in an Adam Grant book, which was about the idea that we can only hold 7 things, or most people as an average can only hold about 7 things concurrently in our processing center of our brain at one time. So it means that if you're trying to learn a new subject, oh, that's the book that I listened to it in. It was the Ultra Learning book with the 9 steps to ultra learning. And this was talking about the overall processing power of your brain. And what it suggested is that you can understand that you can only hold a certain number of things in your head at the same time. And so what you can do is make sure that you're not holding unnecessary information in there. So for example, if you are reading or learning something new and it's over 2 pages, it's better to look at those pages at the same time than it is to look at one page and then turn the page to the next page. And it's ridiculous that something like that could cause so much of a difference. But it's because if you can see it in front of you, if you can see images and graphs or whatever it is you're learning in front of you, then you don't have to remember that thing. You don't have to store that thing in short-term memory, which then means that you have more overall processing power within your brain and you're less likely to get cognitively overloaded and then not learn the thing that you were trying to learn. As humans, generally, we are pattern driven, and the patterns that we tend to learn and understand are more from a survival point of view. They are more fear driven than they are, I guess, fair and equally driven. So what I mean by that is there's this idea of seeing things that aren't there. And so we see something move the grass in the distance a long time ago, somewhere in our evolution. We see the grass move in the distance, and we have to make a choice whether or not that is a tiger or whether it's the wind blowing the grass. And it is better for us evolutionarily to think it's a tiger 100 times when 99 times it's not and run away than it is to think it's probably just the grass at the 99th time and then the 100th time it is a tiger. So we are always driven more towards the fear side of things rather than the general and fair and balanced view. The other thing that's really interesting about patterns and the way that we behave generally is that if you really drill down into the detail of something, there is normally a reason that you do a thing. There is normally some kind of perceived positive benefit of the way that you behave. So, in order to make changes and shifts, in order to feel more comfortable with a different path, we also have to break down not just what we think about something, but why that thought is there and what benefit that thought is having for us. What do we think it's doing? Is it trying to keep us safe? Is it trying to keep us within a social hierarchy, etc.? Because there will always be something, even if that thing is flawed in some way, will always be something as a reason for why we think the way that we do. And I think that's why it's so difficult sometimes to shift negative feelings and beliefs about things. And once a feeling or a belief takes hold, we have all kinds of mechanisms to help reinforce that behavior. We have selection bias, where we can see all of the things which are reinforcing that behavior and none of the things that are going against it. We have group thinking, where just because everybody else does something a certain way, if we even started to question why we would do it that way, the group mentality does it that way. And so we kind of slip back in, we want to fit in with the pack, so we don't challenge our own thinking. Again, we haven't evolved to live in this modern world, so going against the group feels dangerous. It feels like standing out is potentially risky, because you could be ostracized from the group, you could be sent out on your own, and that could mean that you didn't eat or you were less likely to survive. So standing out, questioning things, doing things a different way to other people can create a huge kind of negative response, even if you can cognitively understand that it might be better for you as a person. And then there's the ways that our thinking backfires. So in the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, he suggests that there's two kinds of thinking within our brain. There's the system one, which is the fast, automatic, frequent, and instant way that our brain works. And then the system two, which is the slow, more effortful, thinking, logical, calculating, conscious side of our brain. And I think that goes back to what I was saying before about these kind of default patterns. The default patterns would sit within system one, but sometimes these default patterns run incorrectly. And that's where intuition doesn't necessarily lead to the correct response. So there's this idea called the sunk cost fallacy, which some people might be aware of, which is all to do with the more money you've put into a thing, the more likely you are to keep putting money into a thing, even if the thing is failing. This happens in businesses all of the time. It happens with investments that we make. It happens with houses. It happens with anything. And the reason for this is because we no longer get to be objective about that thing. Because money is such an emotive thing, it creates this idea that we don't want to lose the money that we've already put in. We're really regret averse as a species. And so because we don't want to regret it, we would rather throw extra money, good money after bad, constantly, rather than accepting that that money is already gone, and it doesn't matter how much more money we put in, that money is already lost. So given that this has been a bit of a wandering journey, I'm going to wrap up. And I think for this first episode, all I want to get across is this idea that we don't always know what we're doing. We don't always know why we're doing something. And for me, doing something without understanding why we're doing it and understanding how our decisions are influencing and constructing the life that we live is a really interesting thing that I feel like I want to, and I hope you want to too, challenge more. I think the more things we regularly pull out of our system one, out of our automatic and unconscious thinking, and take them out, play with them a little bit, give them a bit of a clean, and decide if there's any bits that we don't need anymore before we chuck them back into the subconscious, the easier it will be for our lives to be constructed in a way that we want to live. So, if all of that makes sense, if all of it is exciting and interesting to you and you want to come along this journey with me, then by all means show up to the next episode, which I should publish soon. And that will be the first episode that I really get quite deep into a subject and I play with some ideas and hopefully trigger some interesting thoughts for you to go and explore as well. Thank you very much for listening if you've got all the way to the end. And I really hope that you come and join me soon for the rest of this journey. Bye for now.